Have you ever wondered why some people seem to crush logical reasoning with minimal effort, while others get stuck no matter how many LSAT practice questions they do? What if I told you there's a simple, almost outrageously easy way to boost your logical reasoning accuracy without memorizing a million complicated tactics? Today, I'm going to share with you how I personally raised my LSAT score from a 152 to a 175 and how the core strategy I discovered can work for you too. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand logical reasoning on a deeper level, but you'll also have a game plan that can immediately boost your score. First, for those who don't know me, my name is Steve Schwartz. I've been teaching the LSAT since 2005, and yes, I personally increased my own LSAT score 23 points, getting me a 175 on test day. Now, early in my LSAT prep, I did what most folks do. I dutifully memorized question types. I had flashcards for every possible label: strengthen, weaken, flaw, necessary assumption, you name it. I was collecting these like Pokemon cards, convinced that if I could just label the question correctly, I'd magically choose the correct answer. But I still got stuck. I'd see a question stem that said weaken and I'd freeze. Or I'd see something with evaluate the argument and it felt entirely new. My biggest breakthrough happened when I realized the LSAT was testing the same underlying reasoning patterns over and over again. These question types were just different wrappers on the same exact candy. I stopped focusing on question types and started focusing on the method of reasoning in the argument itself. Almost overnight, I began to see the entire test through a different lens. It wasn't about checking boxes for a certain category. It wasn't about following a rigid formula that might or might not apply. Instead, it was about dissecting the argument's structure, the conclusion, the evidence, the gap, and seeing how the question stem wanted me to respond to that structure. So instead of memorizing countless question types, I spent time truly understanding what the argument was actually doing, and that's when the real progress began. To illustrate this, imagine you have two puzzles: a puzzle in a green box labeled weaken and a puzzle in a blue box labeled flaw. If you pour out both puzzles, you'll notice that many of the pieces are actually the same exact shape, just colored differently. The LSAT reuses the same puzzle pieces across different question types. Once you master how those pieces fit together, you can solve multiple puzzles with the exact same approach. For example, flaw questions might ask, where did the argument's logic go wrong? While weaken questions might ask, which choice would expose or highlight the flaw in the argument, making the conclusion less likely? At a structural level, they both rely on identifying what's missing or incorrect in the argument. The difference is that flaw questions want you to spot it directly, while weaken questions want you to apply an answer choice that exploits that gap. So when you realize you're dealing with a similar bad assumption in both question types, you can treat them almost interchangeably. One puzzle, two labels. This is huge. If you love flaw questions but you hate weaken questions, you can just transform a weaken question into a flaw question in your mind. That mental reframe can drastically improve your accuracy and cut down on the time you spend second-guessing yourself. Now, the majority of logical reasoning questions on the LSAT contain arguments rather than fact sets. And when I say arguments, I mean a statement that has both evidence and conclusion. The test makers might try to disguise it by burying the conclusion in the middle of a paragraph or using quirky wording, but it's always there. So if you can get really good at dissecting an argument's core components, conclusion, evidence, and reasoning gap, you're already equipped to master most of the logical reasoning section. And that skill also applies to a good chunk of the fact set questions as well. Your habit of looking for structure will still carry over. So what you want to do is prioritize analyzing arguments, understanding how to quickly spot the conclusion, the support for that conclusion, and the hidden gap in logic will pay massive dividends across multiple question types. Now, one common mistake I see is that people do a question, they immediately check an explanation, they nod their heads, and they move on. That's not real learning. That's passive reading or watching. It doesn't transform how you think about questions. Instead, at LSAT Unplugged, We use something called the Socratic review method to help you understand the argument, understand the question, and understand the answers. Understanding the argument means breaking it down regardless of the question type. ID the conclusion and the evidence. If the argument's flawed, you want to be able to articulate exactly how and why. Understanding the question means you can ID what LSAC wants you to do with the argument. Is it asking you to fix the gap, exploit the gap, or simply identify the gap? Understanding the answers means you look at each choice and ask yourself, why might this choice be tempting? And why is it ultimately wrong if it is? And why might the correct answer choice seem less appealing at first glance? And why is it actually correct? When you slow down and engage in this back and forth dialogue with yourself or with a coach, you reveal your personal traps. Maybe you're consistently tricked by choices that sound clever, but miss the logical gap. Or maybe you dismiss right answers because they're stated in a way that feels too obvious or too broad. If you dissect your errors and successes this way, you train your brain to see patterns. That way, next time you see a similar trap, you recognize it instantly. That's how you leap from a plateau in the 150s or 160s up into the 170s through active dialogue-based review. Now, if you'd like my help engaging in this process, my team and I would be glad to help you out. We'll match you with private one-on-one coaching on a consistent weekly basis. We'll create for you a personalized day-by-day study plan. So if you'd like my help in that process, getting to that top score, you can check out the links below to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Now let's talk about 3 quick wins you can implement immediately. Think of these like stepping stones that can immediately raise your accuracy. Quick win number 1, master the difference between necessary assumption and sufficient assumption questions. A lot of LSAT prep companies lump these under one umbrella, assumption questions, which is misleading because the LSAT has both necessary assumption questions and sufficient assumption questions. Necessary assumptions are required for the argument to work. The argument falls apart without this piece. Even if it's not enough to guarantee the conclusion, it's still something that must be true for the logic to hold. On the other hand, sufficient assumptions are the silver bullet that outright prove the conclusion 100%. Once you add it, the conclusion follows logically. And these two require different mindsets. For necessary assumption questions, think to yourself, if this assumption is denied, does the argument fall apart? For sufficient assumption questions, think to yourself, does this by itself make the conclusion valid? If you mix these up, it's a surefire way to get stumped or choose the wrong answer, so lock down this distinction ASAP. Quick win number 2 is to distinguish must be true from most strongly supported. Both of them fall under the inference umbrella, but they're not identical. Must be trues follow 100% from the stimulus. There's no wiggle room at all. So if you see something that's not strictly proven, it's out. On the other hand, in most strongly supported questions, the answer likely follows from the information given, but it might not be airtight. It's more of a best fit scenario where the answer is strongly supported, but not necessarily guaranteed beyond all doubt. And if you confuse these, you're going to have big headaches. Sometimes students eliminate a perfectly valid most supported answer because it's not totally proven, or they choose a most supported choice on a must be true because it seems correct, but it's not bulletproof. So you want to keep the lines between the two crystal clear. Quick win number 3 is to understand that weakening an argument doesn't mean destroying it. This is a classic pitfall. When a question asks you to weaken an argument, you might be hunting for a choice that totally destroys the argument, and that can happen, but often you just need to dent the conclusion, making it less likely to be true. It's a relative thing here, not an all or nothing scenario. So don't get stuck waiting for a perfect knockout punch. If a choice introduces any doubt or undermines the logic even slightly, it can be a correct weakened choice. So keep that nuance in mind and you'll avoid overreaching. Now, you might already know that logical reasoning is now 2/3 of the scored sections on the LSAT, and that means every point you gain in LR effectively counts double. So if you're on the fence about which section to prioritize, the data is clear. LR is king. So again, if you'd like my help mastering logical reasoning on your journey to scoring that 170 plus, my team and I would be glad to help you out, whether it's through our live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. You can check out the links below to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd be glad to help you out. Now, if you're already scoring at 165 or above, you might not be missing questions because you don't understand the question type. Instead, you're missing them because the argument's more abstract or you're falling for subtle traps in the choices. So here's what you can do. In this situation, double down on Socratic review. Each missed question is a gold mine. Spend quality time dissecting why you chose the wrong answer and why the right answer was correct. Practice targeted drills on complex arguments. Choose questions that focus on advanced conditional reasoning, layered assumptions, or numbers versus percentages. You could also try teaching or explaining concepts to others, because if you can articulate the reasoning out loud to a friend or a study buddy, you'll internalize it better. This is why at LSAT Unplugged, we actually facilitate study groups to help you engage in that process with others on the same journey as you, integrating yourself into that community. So don't be tempted to just churn through questions and measure your progress by how many you complete, because quality beats out quantity every single time. So your next step is to integrate these approaches into your daily study routine. Instead of hammering out 40 questions in a row, maybe just pick 5 or 10 and review them thoroughly using the Socratic review method. Slow down, analyze each step, and learn from your mistakes. Then, when you're ready for specialized support, reach out. We'd be glad to help. And in the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.